forever thankful that she did that for us to give us the opportunity. And that's why that picture showed you, the humble beginnings. And yet, through hard work, which is a key theme amongst a lot of Filipino stories, through hard work and grit and sacrifice, we can accomplish much in this land. So the American dream has not only been made possible in Rosalie's story in the book, but certainly in my family as well. So love the book, and glad that Monica made me read it.
Um, so I do echo a lot of Sigrid's comments. I was born in the Philippines and completed my first college degree over there. And I remember at 16, so we don't have middle school in the Philippines. We usually graduate at 16 years old from high school. And prior to graduation, I was in our house in the kitchen, and my mom and I were talking about options for college. And this is how so ingrained nursing is, that that's usually the first suggestion that parents would have. And so she told me that nursing would be a great fit. And I laughed out loud at the outrageousness of that suggestion, thinking, because I was such a rebellious teenager, I will not be part of that narrative of these people having to get into a very tough industry and then searching for their fortune elsewhere beyond the country. But of course, while I was saying that, my dad was already here in the States. He moved to the States in the mid '80s, and he would visit, come home, just like the story, come home once a year, and it was always like the holidays for us. My original ancestor, my original ancestor who braved the journey, also came in the 60s, in 1965, and she's in Florida now. She's a newly retired ICU nurse. And it was from that main aunt who eventually did petition for my grandparents to move to the States, which happened in the 70s. And then subsequently, my grandparents petitioned for a couple of the younger kids to move as well. So that's how my dad ended up in the US. And I was thinking, having that conversation during graduation, I will not be part of that narrative of Filipinos slaving away at some foreign hospital, knowing in the back of my mind too that it was going to be a US hospital if I did take that route. So she backed off, and I was able to get my degree in sociology and psychology, because those were very economically viable options for us, right? I say that in jest. It was either that or an English major. So I think she was happy that I chose those two. But ultimately, I moved to the States when I was 20 and worked as a social worker, and realized just the economic limitations of that career as a newbie in Georgia. And later on, as my sister, the youngest sister, was getting ready for her own college experience, when she decided to embrace nursing, is when 10 years later, in a different kitchen, but still my parents, I told my mom that I was going to go back to school to go into nursing. And it was her turn to laugh outrageously and basically say, "I told you so." But yeah, I actually did get into nursing at a later age, but it has been wonderful to me, because I did find my passion, and I've used it in ways that were meaningful in different aspects of of my identity. The book is wonderful. Initially, I was concerned about it glorifying poverty. I have a critical automatic reaction against foreigners looking into the plight of Filipinos, and think there's a thing about fetishizing poverty, as far as I'm concerned. And I thought that's what it was going to be, and it turned out not to be the case. He gave, I think, a factual account in the first few chapters of it, but really highlighted the tenacity of all of the family members as they went through different parts of the globe and experienced, shared the experience of what a good provider is. And that notion of a good provider, that is ingrained in the national identity of Filipinos. We have now incorporated that to such an extent. It's mythologized. It's highly internalized to where at this point now, 50 years into regular migration, it's almost never questioned. So yeah, I've got a lot more thoughts, but I ended up liking the book, and I'm glad that we're doing this discussion tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for sharing that. And I really appreciate your honest input on it and your impressions and how maybe it surprised you in that way. So that's great. I'm also watching the chat and I'm seeing so many proud friends and connections with Andre and connections being made with others here, and it's really fun. So thank you. Please do feel free to keep chatting there and posting your thoughts about the book and just connecting with one another, because I think it's great to have all this going on. It makes it a little bit more of a natural kind of connection. So yes, we're all proud of Andre. Thank you, Sigrid. That's wonderful. So actually, my next question is going to turn back to Andre again. So I wanted to step back a little bit, because I think as Dr. Flores was saying, the first couple chapters in particular, but throughout the book, I think the author makes a really strong case talking about the history of migration, and the economic factors, and really goes into a lot of depth about this. And I learned so much that I was not at all aware of before, which I think is so critical as we're trying to all learn more about different cultures and about what the background is of others. And so, Andre, as we think about this, I thought it would be important for us to hear a little bit more about some of this history, because I know that's in particular your work. If you could just take us down that path a little bit more and flesh it out for us, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I hope that when I finally get to writing my dissertation, I could write something as informative and also as broad sweeping as something like this. But anyway, in terms of how many Filipino nurses there are in the United States, I was trying to dig up some data, and I was trying to understand some estimates from the Census Bureau and the American Community Survey, and it looks like of like the 3.8 million nurses that we know we make in this country, about 199,000 of them are Filipino, and that's about 5% of all nurses here in the United States. And that includes a lot of nurses who are mixed. It includes nurses who are Filipino who were born here in the United States. So it also includes, of course, the waves of Filipino nurses who trained in the United States, or who trained in the Philippines and then ended up immigrating to the United States, like my mom. So I see her waving. A lot of what we connect back to why there are so many Filipino nurses in the United States is the United States' accession of the Philippines as a territory after the Spanish-American War in 1898. And then later in 1965 with the Immigration Naturalization Act, that opened up a lot of visas, especially employment-based visas, which a lot of nurses use to immigrate to the United States. In about like 2000 or 2003, around that time, the NCLEX, which is, as probably many of you know, since a lot of people here are nurses, the licensure exam for United States nurses began to be offered in many other countries. And I think around 2003 and 2004, it finally reached the Philippines too. So you can see how it's not just, a bunch of Filipinos having heard of the United States and, trying to follow their curiosity and everything. But there's a lot of things structured in how the United States has created a relationship with the Philippines that has created a pathway for immigration for many Filipinos to come here. There are a lot of nurses from many other countries who migrate across the world. The WHO, the World Health Organization, last year in celebration for the Year of the Nurse and Midwife, put out their State of the World's Nursing Report. And I think I put it on the slides too, but I think the figure was about 1 out of every 8 nurses practices in the country other than the one that they were born or trained. So you can see that healthcare really affects a lot of people and brings a lot of nurses to work in many different parts of the world.
Thank you for that. It's really helpful to put that in context. So I know, Dennis, I know you worked very closely with Andre on his dissertation committee in an advisory space. So I think you probably have some things that you might like to add in that space as well. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, so as part of the conversation we were having prior to us going live at 7 o'clock, having, as someone who was born in the Philippines and still keeps up with local politics, and now having to read the book and being mindful of the issues that are being faced by Filipino American nurses at the workplace and in larger society, I am just struck by the role, or the minimal role, that the Philippine government has really played, to varying degrees in these last couple of administrations. To me, ultimately, I think that the wealth of the Philippines has always been its people. And unfortunately, the flip side of that is, to a degree, you can say that its curse has been its leadership. Too long, there's been so much corruption in the Philippines, and it's just part of the status quo. And just like how Rosalie has been the dependable resource whenever there's a family emergency, the Filipino worker, including the Filipino nurse overseas, they're the ones who have continued to bail out the country time and time again, I feel like. And there was a question that was submitted to the panel regarding how we feel about our remittances going back to the Philippines. And this is an example of how that system, has been perpetuated for the longest time. And it's understandable because folks decide to go overseas to help out their families. But it also, the larger economic implication of that is that there has been some reliance and over-reliance on this really exploited group of people. And in an effort to maintain, there's always been an unequal distribution of power and wealth in the Philippines. And those who, not surprisingly, in positions of power, perpetuate it by, in some ways, glorifying, as I said earlier, mythologizing the Filipino workers. And in some ways, it distracts from the fact that there's not good structures in place to ensure the health and welfare of folks across the diaspora. And that's one of the things that we're looking at the working conditions of Filipinos, not just in the US, but across the globe, and thinking of how we can, there's not even any kind of repatriation plan or any concern about stopping the full migration of our people to take care of our own economy. So this book highlights for me the government's abdication of its responsibility. And that's just one of the biggest themes that I got out of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for calling that out. And I'm going to, just as a heads up to our panelists, I'm going to jump ahead a little on the questions, because I think you perfectly teed up there, Dr. Flores, the idea that there's, there's work to be done then in the advocacy space, the protection of Filipino workers that in many ways the government has abdicated. And I was struck in many sad ways about how, different oversight would come about after a difficult situation, but it was really in name only, and it really didn't do much to protect the workers, and that the economics was the driving force always, and the injustices that the Filipino nurses have faced and their lack of being able to draw on their government for protection was difficult to read, absolutely. And so, I want to turn to you, Dr. Ladores, because I know that a lot of your work, and actually I was interested to read that PNAA, which I'm going to ask you to talk about a little bit, was really formed to think about the advocacy and the protection of Filipino nurses in the U.S. And so I would love if you could talk a little bit about what some of those current day issues are, or if, if you want to go back as well, that'll be fine, and let us know, what's happening now and sort of what work is being done in this advocacy space. Bring us up to speed.
Thank you for that question, Monica. So PNAA, the Filipino Nurse Association of America, was founded in 1979 solely to meet the growing needs of Filipino nurses who come to the United States to ensure that they're properly treated and protected. So our mission and vision statements on our website reflect that, and we live it. So for the past 41 years, PNAA has been involved in grassroots effort to make sure that the voices of Filipino nurses are heard and their contributions are recognized in the overall scheme of healthcare in the United States. So we have had, the PNAA has had 21 presidents thus far. We have a very ambitious, driven current president who is in New York, Dr. Mary Joy Garcia-Dia, who is really pushing for better protections for Filipino nurses in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure everyone on this call has heard or have read some of the really worrisome statistics related to Filipino nurses who are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 virus, and too many deaths, too many injuries on the job. And it's multifactorial, but we need to do a better job with addressing why this is happening and how can we prevent it and support the nurses who are going through this. So the 21 presidents since 1979 have had their platforms, but weaved into each of their platforms over the years is this idea of advocacy. So advocacy has been present and center in all the work that PNAA is doing. There's been instances of PNAA coming in to support nurses who are discriminated against, or and in some cases, actually, the reason why PNAA was started was because of two Filipino nurses in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who worked at the ICU at the VA, who were charged for murder. Apparently, there were a series of deaths on the unit, and they tried to pin this on the two nurses. And eventually, while they were not found guilty of murder, they were found guilty of poisoning, the lower charge. But with a lot of uproar created by the Filipino community, the case was actually retried. And during retrial, it was found that the case had no merit, really. And so the case was dismissed, and yet these two nurses' lives are forever ruined. And so these are just examples of what PNA has been doing since the very beginning. And we fight hard to make sure that our Filipino nurses are protected, and that they are shown to be the excellent nurses that they are. We currently have 55 chapters and about over 5,000 members. So, we partner, and we have a lot of partnerships, and we are affiliates of NSIMNA, which is the, of course, this is gonna leave my mind. Is it the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nurse Associations? I got it. And also the American Nurses Association, and other, organizations who look out for the health and well-being of nurses. So we're proud to partner with them. And if anyone else wants to add in, we are an active organization. And I would like to acknowledge some of our PNAA leaders are actually on this call. They were very happy to, be invited to join our book club discussion today. So I'm sure at some point, after the panelists go, they may have some thoughts and other insights that they would like to offer. So thank you for coming.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. And so this, just thinking about all of this brings me to a question that was submitted during registration from one of our attendees tonight. And I had sort of put it in the idea of, what does all of this mean to the US born American nurse? And I think they much more beautifully worded it as, please talk about ways to support migrant colleagues and to support Filipino nurses, and without making presumptions that could be offensive, right? How can we do that? And what would be the right path for that? So I would love some ideas, some thoughts. I remember reading in the book club itself on the online chat, someone had said, I remember at one point in my early career, one of my colleagues was a Filipino nurse and her child was at home. And I remember, maybe having some judgmental thoughts about that. And then looking back, I feel so much differently about it and wish I had dealt with it and been more supportive. And so I think about things like that as well, and wondering if you have some ideas. And I'll open that to all of our panelists, but Dr. Ladores, if you want to start with that, then we can open it up to everyone.
Thank you for that question from this group. I think that's an excellent start to our conversation. I think, I think it's best to acknowledge the sacrifices that these foreign nurses, not just Filipinos even, foreign nurses who come to the US, they have left behind families, homes, careers to start fresh. We hear of Filipino physicians who go through nursing school to make it out of the country because there are better opportunities here in the US. Acknowledging their sacrifices. And for me, being a representative of PNAA, it would be remiss of me to not mention that anyone who is a Filipino nurse really should be encouraged, especially if they're newly migrated, that they should be connected to some networks. And PNAA could be one of those networks. We build in some mentorship programs across a variety of different ways in PNAA through the local chapter and the national chapter, so that we can help ease that transition period. Homesickness, I know the book mentioned that quite a lot, is real and it's heavy, and I certainly felt that as a 15-year-old coming from the Philippines, even though I was very excited at the prospect of seeing snow, right? Because I landed in New Jersey, coming from a tropical country like the Philippines. Snow was the biggest, adventure in my 15-year-old mind. But certainly assimilation cannot be forced. It can be supported. It can be gentle. And so there were cases where, and it actually, Rosalie in the book was a target of some discriminatory acts by, her employer, where she, a bunch of Filipino nurses on the unit were forbidden to speak in Tagalog. And so, that question of how do we help? How can we be an ally? Let them speak in Tagalog, as long as it's not hurting anyone, as long as it's not hurting the patients. I know the author, Jason DeParle, mentioned this in one of his talks, that talking in Filipino is comforting, to us. It's our connection. And in the Philippines, there are hundreds of dialects as well spoken. So when we find each other, in the midst of this crazy world, and we can speak the same dialect, there's that instant connection. And so support that, encourage that. At the end of the day, you know, if you don't know anything, ask, right? Don't make assumptions. It's okay to ask us, why, it's in the book, why we say if we speak too much English, our nose bleed, right? What does that mean? We have certain expressions that don't make a lot of sense to other people. And so it's okay to ask questions. We're happy to answer them and provide context.
I think that's pretty wonderful feedback on how somebody can be an active supporter on behalf of their Filipino coworkers, Filipino nurse coworkers, or even their neighbors who happen to be Pinoy. Um, I think there's a lot of opportunity for non-Filipino nurses to be really significant partners with the immigrant nurse. For example, just going through the book and knowing the ethos that drives for why these nurses work so hard, why they would take double shifts or sign up for overtime, and perhaps being that person who gives them a gentle reminder that you need to take care of yourself, or advocating for them if they are being reassigned to a unit that they've never had any experience before, but just because their demeanor might not be one that's conducive for questioning authority, you might be the one to step in their place and say, hey, listen, I don't like this system that we're always sending Rosalie to the next unit, or calling out injustice in every form it might take, whether it be a microaggression or a macroaggression. I've seen a lot of aunties really just go with the flow, because that's also part of the narrative. A good person is one who does not make waves. And that's just not really the way it would work if you're being abused, or if you're always the one bearing the brunt of practices that are, just not healthy. We are dealing with a pandemic. We're about to get into the first year anniversary. We've heard of the stories of Filipino nurses disproportionately dying from COVID-19. And this is exactly a result of the social determinants of health that have negatively affected them, both at their workplace and at home. So we have Filipino nurses who are working at bedside and critical care. And these are the areas in the hospital that really increases their exposure risk. We also have a lot of them with pre-existing conditions from the regular stress of racism, the stress of being exposed to food that is not really the kind of food that they were accustomed with when they first went from where they came from. They have multi-generational family members who work in healthcare. If you've got 2 or 3 people living at home who all work in an acute care setting, that just exponentially increases your risk for exposure, right? And so if we're really paying attention and being mindful of being a good coworker, you can also help us save us from ourselves. This whole ethos of having to work hard, as I said earlier, doing overtime, or nudging your charge nurse in the direction of, okay, they've been really working hard. Can we rotate them somewhere that's a little bit less frontline in nature? So these are just simple steps, and I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to assist Filipino nurses.
And I think it's just really important to find ways to build community with the people who are immediately around you. As much as a PhD student as I am, and as interested as I am in like health policy and like these issues from looking at a regulatory level and a broad level, I think that even if we had all those things in place, we still need to, say hi to our coworkers and to build relationships and friendships with them. I For the American Association for the History of Nursing, I've been the diversity and inclusion chair for the past year, and I remember I was speaking to another diversity inclusion, like assistant dean type person at a different university. And I was just asking her, like, what are the concrete goals that you do to make the places where we work just like more hospitable places? And she said to me that like one of the first things that she wanted people to do was to like be in community with each other. It's hard to have hard conversations about like the things that are offensive to other people if you don't have a relationship that even ties you to them. So I think about that a lot because I think that goes a long way in our workplaces, like whether it's in hospitals or other workplace settings we are in with nurses from various backgrounds. And that's something that's been helpful for me to think about.
Can I
So
just
much. Go ahead.
sorry. So as we're talking about the book and we're really highlighting all of these issues that are important to note, I also want to make sure that folks hear a little bit of the resilience of Filipino nurses and the achievements of folks, especially as the their kids, become part of as they become part of the fabric of American society, and their kids as Filipino Americans really take ownership of this wonderful identity that they have. We've proven our mettle. And I'm not surprised at how well first and second generation immigrants are faring in the US. Besides being awesome bedside nurses, Filipinos are also awesome in so many other fields. We're found in hospital boardrooms, in academia, in major leadership positions. And I take immense pride in that. In California and in Illinois, a lot of strong Filipino leadership in terms of unions, nurses unions, are Pinoy. And they're really showing their strength in organizing for better working conditions. We have Filipino faculty members and deans of schools of nurses. So these are tangible examples of how we have really put our dent in the industry and are continually molding or shaping how this industry as a whole will become beyond just as an ethnic or as a racial ethnic identity, professional identity.
Thank you for that. I think that's really important that we not take what we've read from this book, right, and put that in a box. I appreciate you sharing that. And thank you all for your comments and your really practical advice, which I think is really helpful, really helpful. So if anyone has any questions, I want to remind folks you can absolutely put that in the chat. And I do want to take a quick second and say that the dean is here tonight. She is listening, and so I know that she is she wants to jump in and say hello, of course, and we would all love to hear from her. So Dean, would you like to say something?
No, absolutely. I had to, looks like I'm frozen. Oh, had to be here tonight. And again, I was interested in hearing some of your reactions to the book and to just the heartfelt story about Rosalie and understanding and seeing in a way that I had never understood before some of the issues and challenges that are faced not only by Filipino nurses, but also nurses who migrate here as well. So it was a hard book to read, and again, appreciate your context. I also want to say I was one of the founders of NCIMNA, and I've had the privilege of working with many of the Filipino presidents. What you have not shared is that you probably have the best parties. You are the most welcoming group and so compassionate. When we first got a grant to support an initiative that we had with NCIMNA, we went to everybody's national meetings, and the Filipino nurses, by far, we had the most fun, the most dancing, the talent shows. I mean, all of it. What a great sense of community. But importantly, you have extraordinary leaders, and I'm so thrilled that we have so many leaders that are in our school as students, as faculty and also as alums. So again, and I see some parents here, it looks like. So again, it's good to see you all here. Thanks to the alumni community and Monica, your leadership for moving this forward. The idea for this book club came because I met Jason's wife. And he said, "Oh, my husband just wrote a book about, nurse migration and Filipino nurses." I said, "Well, how come I don't know about this?" So he sent me the book, and I was going to read it last year on my spring break at the beach. But you know what happened during spring break, and so I had no time to read the book. So I'm just reading it now. Jason is wonderful. I hope you join us for the event on the 25th. That will put this issue of nurse migration in a bigger context, because it's women's issues, it's exploitation, it's Sunny, I don't know if I should say thank you for writing all these things in there. It's just leaving me so depressed about how we have treated Filipino nurses, but I think it's just great for all of us to know. So I could go on and on and on, but I won't. But again, just great to see everybody here tonight.
Thank you, Dean. It's so great to have you. Yeah, always appreciate your support. And that is exactly the story. The Dean met Jason DeParle, the author's wife, and that is why we were reading the book. And I think that, her advocacy in this space was terrific. And so we're so thrilled to be reading it, and to have, for folks like me who had not had their eyes open to this, I think it's really powerful. So I am just heartbroken, actually, that we are at 5 of 8, because I feel like there's so much ground that we could cover here. And Sunny, you've been putting a lot of things in the chat as the Dean referenced that. I know we had wanted to touch on some of the things that are happening in the news. And I know, Dennis, you mentioned a little bit of that, sort of the unbelievably sad, disproportionate number of COVID deaths among Filipino nurses, the mistreatment by police in the criminal justice system, and just so much more, all of the issues that we're hearing about this year and that we're all experiencing, and are that much worse, frankly, for this community, which is, something that we're all mindful of and wanting to pay attention to and advocate for. So I want to, I think what I want to do is ask each of our panelists if there's any final thing you want to add. And then I think we will be done for the night, which I really am sad about, because I know there's so much more we could say, but you've shared so many wonderful things. And I'm so thrilled to have you and to have this discussion, and appreciate all of our participants tonight, especially the family members, which is just so fun. So love you all for being here. So panelists, I want to open it up to each of you, maybe to just say any final words, or just something that you wanted to make sure we cover if we haven't yet.
Just final thoughts for me. I think there's been a lot of talk about Filipino nurses leaving the Philippines and creating this brain drain. You've heard that term before. But the author Jason also brings back an equally important aspect, which is brain gain. And we exemplify that through the work of PNAA. We have a program called Balik Toro, which means that those of us here in the United States, the Filipino nurses, go back to the Philippines and give back, not just through medical and dental missions, but we actually become faculty of sorts. We become guest lecturers, guest professors, visiting professors. And so it is an expectation that we take in all these extra skill set, knowledge, experiences here in the United States, and then bring it back and help our countrymen and women to elevate themselves as well. So I think that's a key distinction that I'd like to make. And also one last point is that while a lot of our past administration is focused, and shed light on illegal immigrants and the drain on American resources, I'd like to point out that this really was all about legal migration. And so there's that distinction, and they cannot be lumped in together at the same time. So my family is an example of legal migration. It took us 15 years to get our papers, to be able to come as green card holders or resident aliens. You know, we sought every opportunity to become better and to actualize that American dream.
Um, on the Thanks, Sigrid. On the American dream, we've seen through the last decades how Filipino Americans have internalized, Filipinos as well back in the old country have internalized this narrative of what a good provider is, what a good Filipino is supposed to be, and we've really refashioned it to make it a personal story and part of our national identity, something that's based on fortitude. And it sounds great. Uh, but if we look at how other racial ethnic groups in the last few years have been going about with looking at their history, they've been forcing a reckoning of the unequal and the unfair, unjust treatment of their members, and examining its relationship with current power structures. I don't think that as a group, uh, especially back in the old country, we have yet to gain any kind of traction in formulating any kind of similar restorative justice or accountability framework. And I think it's up to, there's a large responsibility that Filipino nurses in the US can do to have that conversation be fostered back in the Philippines. Uh, Keeping with this year in and year out tradition of sending Filipinos elsewhere uh, for economic gain or for economic security. While it's worked, I think we can do better, but for the people back in the Philippines. There are lots of kids left behind, and this is not the most ideal situation for those kids who are separated from their families. And that's actually a picture that happens in other immigrant groups. So I'll just leave it at that. We have a lot of responsibility in making sure that everybody who's here and everybody back home are able to self-actualize, just as what Sigrid had said. And I put that out as a major concern and something that should ground what we do going forward. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here.
And just very quickly, because I know I'm watching the clock too, I just want to thank everyone for coming. And I want to thank so many people that my mom shared the invite to, because it's a lot of people who have not only supported this event, of course, but have also been role models. And the more that I study nursing from this perspective and study Filipinos in it, it just gives me such a different perspective and an appreciation for the generation my parents come from and the rest of my family comes from. So thanks everyone for supporting me and for supporting this event here tonight.
Thank you so much. Andre, Sigrid, Dennis, it's been such a pleasure to work with you on this, to have you here. I've learned so much, and I can tell from the really active chat that you've touched a lot of people and they have learned so much as well. So thank you for being with us tonight and for sharing your story, for sharing your work. Really appreciate it. And so I'm going to ask the three of you to stay on for a minute, but the others, we are going to say goodnight to all of you, and thank you for being here. And one last announcement, I just put this in the chat a minute ago, but I do want to let you know 1 month from today, on March 25th, as the Dean mentioned, is our second book club event for this book, and we are really excited. I'm going to hold it up because I feel like I need props always. Jason DeParle, the author, will be with us. We'll be talking about migration. And yeah, excellent. It's like book club, show and tell. Excellent. Points for you. So, and then we have someone from Prairie World House at Penn joining us, and someone from CogFan joining us as well. So we're going to be talking about migration at a global level. I think it'll be a fascinating conversation, a little bit of a different angle from tonight. So we would love to have all of you join us for that. And we'll be sending out an email probably tomorrow. So you can check that, not have to grab it from the chat real quick now, but you can check that. And we hope that you will join us again. And if you haven't already, please join the Alumni Book Club. You do not have to be an alum. It is for alumni, but it's not exclusive to alumni. So if you love to read and you love to read with really smart people like Penn Nursing Alumni, then this is the place for you. Our next book will be talking about HIV/AIDS in a really great story about a family's experience, sort of uncovering family history from the outbreak in the 80s. So I think that might be an interesting book as well, and we will be doing some talks about that in addition. So please think about joining us. We'd love to have you again. That will be in the email that will come out to all of you. Okay, so if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me, Monica Salvia, at the alumni office at Penn Nursing. And it was so wonderful to see you all. Have a wonderful night and take care. Bye-bye.